Welcome back to We Burn Blue. We're back with another episode to fill your international break following Chelsea versus Forest. Quick recap, Sharan.
Hi guys. We're back again. And quick recap on Chelsea Forest. I don't know if you guys are out there are following us on X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, but we definitely saw another example of the duality of Sanchez. I do feel like there's a difference between watching the match live versus as a replay, which is what I do most of the time. But when I was watching it live, Prashant, I definitely caught a lot of our immaturity as a playing staff coming out through a lot of again ill discipline and fighting with the ref, fighting with the other team, but also like fighting amongst ourselves. There's a lot of bickering and frustration. So yeah, bickering and frustration would probably be the recap I have for Chelsea and Forest.
Yeah, man, that pretty much sums it up. I think frustration seems to be a recurring theme because of how some of our finishing has been. I know we were also discussing immaturity, and that's something we're going to get into. But for today, we've basically planned to do something that we've wanted to do since the transfer windows closed. Of course, we had the matter of the civil war, which seems to have died down since, so maybe much ado about nothing. But what we're going to do now is assess the transfer window and look at the squad we have. Granted, we have the benefit of hindsight given that we're almost 2 months into the season, and there is a bit of an identity forming about the squad and the way Maresca is setting up. But we still wanted to assess some of the business done, discuss the squad composition, and also talk about what we expect from some of the players. So, Sharon, what do you think was our best piece of business?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of deals to go through, but I'm particularly excited about Renato Vega because I think he's the kind of personality and he's also the kind of stature of player, physically speaking, as well, that we need in the squad. I remember telling you this during Chelsea Forest, but that starting 11 of ours was very short, and we were relying on a lot of variety from set pieces to try and score corners, but actually nothing can really replace brute force with a very good corner cross in and somebody tall heading the ball in. So yeah, I think that would be my best piece of business for the summer. But what about you, Prash?
Yeah, so my first thought was Cole Palmer, the extension to 2033. I think it's
Mm.
great that we've recognized what he's done with the season and we've given him an extension and tied him down further. It was a good time to have done it. In a similar vein, we did the same with Jackson as well. But I also think I like the Pedro Neto signing. He is already shown his quality, I think, and if we can keep him injury-free, he'll be a huge asset. I also like the fact that in an era where every single deal is sort of already known before it's happening and there's official confirmations, this was one that just snuck up on us. Like nobody had any inkling of it happening, and I think that shows that even though there's a lot of PR briefing that's happening, the club is able to move quickly on some key people that they see as targets. So I like how the deal was done, and I also like what it signifies. So that's got to be my best signing right now. And in terms of worse, what are your thoughts? Because there was a lot of things I think we didn't agree with what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to briefly say on the Neto signing, I do hope you're right and it works out because, if he has a really good Chelsea career, I hope people are asking, in the future, where were you when Neto signed? It's one of those, it was completely out of the blue. No one was tracking this. And I think Fabrizio Romano even said that he was told to keep this one hush hush, apparently. So, yeah, man,
Oh yeah.
that one definitely caught us out of the blue. So, yeah, hopefully it works out for Neto and the club. On the worst, I mean, where do I start? I think no, I think I'll just give you one for now. I think, the way we've treated players has not been great, right? Keeping Sanchez at the club. Meanwhile, Petrovic had an amazing season last season. Granted, our expectations for him a lot lower, but also you're looking at Chalobah, Conor Gallagher. These are like core Chelsea homegrown products, players. And yeah, the treatment of these guys has just not been great. So yeah, I think in terms of worst piece of business, I would say yeah, letting those three kind of key players from last season go. In terms of worst signing, I don't know. I do think signing Dewsbury Hall was again. I can see the rationale for it, but really, like, we're eating into already limited minutes by adding him onto the pitch or into the picture. What about you, man?
Yeah, exactly. And you look at the sort of profile of player he is, and you Conor Gallagher just screams at you because I mean he was there doing a sort of similar role. So I think I agree with you. The way we've treated our players has got to be like up there with sort of the worst business handling I've seen in a long time. But even the likes of like Datra Fofana and a couple of other outgoings where the deals just didn't happen because people were not actually focusing on them. And I think this is the worst because you've gone all out for this player and you've not ended up closing him. That's got to be the Osimhen deal. You've put so much behind it, and it was like, okay, this is a done deal, this is a done deal, and then it just doesn't happen. It also shows that there is focus on one particular task and they lose track of the other things. So Osimhen and the domino effect that that had on other outgoings not happening is not an ideal way to conduct business. So yeah, I think that's got to be it for me. Like worst piece of business. In terms of signings, I don't necessarily agree with some of them. But I guess we just see how that goes because I feel like with the likes of Ansel Mino and Caleb Wiley, you've gone for young players, you're taking up loan spots, and then we were left in a situation where at the end we had Raheem Sterling who had to go out on loan somehow or the other, and it was a really messy situation. So I think all of that is just a compounded effect of some bad decisions happening in there as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good you mentioned Sterling because that's one of the most baffling pieces of business we did. So, just to remind everyone, Raheem Sterling was with Chelsea with the squad in preseason in the US for the entirety of the preseason. And I think he also got some minutes against Inter Milan in our last preseason friendly. And then come the first actual competitive game of the season against Man City, he's not even on the bench, and he's been told by the manager that he's probably not going to play any games at Chelsea, which is just a ridiculous way of operating because he's taken up a lot of time in the preseason to gel with the squad. But next thing you know, we're selling him right before the season starts or on the day the season actually started. So yeah, again, I totally agree with what you're saying, but this seems to be the crazy way in which things are going. So why don't we kind of go playing unit by playing unit? So let's say like goalkeepers all the way to kind of forwards or strikers, and see kind of what's changed, and what do we think is appropriate, what's maybe not so good. So why don't we start off with the goalkeepers, Prashant?
Yeah, sure, and of course. So going into the squad build and composition, right? So in the goalkeeping position, we have, of course, Sanchez, Bettinelli, who's our journeyman, homegrown senior third keeper, Bergstrom, who's the academy player in and around the squad, and then of course you have new signing Jorgensen, right? So four keepers, and it seems that Sanchez is our number one keeper in the Premier League, and Jorgensen is making appearances in the cups, so in the Carabao, in the FA, and in the Conference League. What are your thoughts on these four guys?
I mean, I think so. Last season, like I mentioned earlier, I really thought Petrovic was solid, much better than Sanchez has been thus far. But like you say, we're doing this with 1 month's worth of hindsight now, but now we've committed to Sanchez for the whole season. Petrovic for me was a solid shot stopper, and his distribution was not like a disaster. I think he was quite safe, and maybe that's why Maresca has opted out, or the club has opted out of having him on board this season. The more I see of Sanchez and Jorgensen, the more I'm thinking halfway through the season you might see a change and Jorgensen becomes a number one, and that might affect the squad dynamic for now, but I feel like Bergstrom is also kind of just wasting his career at this point. He really needs to leave. He's just been on our books for ages. And then Bettinelli, yeah, you always need somebody who's experienced, but particularly in a Chelsea squad that's so young, having Bettinelli on board, I think is a good idea, and also he's homegrown, right? So he fills that quota for us, and apparently he is a bit of a leader in the dressing room. So yeah, I think in terms of the goalkeepers, I would like, one less. Four is one too many. Bettinelli is kind of like a backup. What do you think about the Sanchez versus Jorgensen debate?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think Sanchez, the errors he makes, I think we talked about this as well. Maresca is handling the situation well by backing his first team keeper and acknowledging that there will be goals that will be conceded in a fashion if we're going to be playing the way we are. But I think it's only a matter of time before Jorgensen is finding himself starting in the league and those two swap positions in that sense.
But let me
Yeah.
ask you this, right? From another perspective, since we're talking about the transfer window, do you wish we had gone out and just signed a full-blown number one?
So I'm with you on the Petrovic thing. I was hoping Petrovic stayed as well. I think he did enough to show that he could have been a good first choice. And given Sanchez's performances last season, I think it was pretty clear. But obviously, the club had a different idea. But other than that, I think the only big name keeper that I remember as linked to, other than of course Edison, was Diogo Costa, who obviously had a decent showing at the Euros with Portugal. But I think there were also some concerns over his height, similar to Kepa. But honestly, like given where we are now, do I think that we should have gone out and signed an out and out number one keeper? No, I think we're okay. I think obviously we've already talked about Sanchez's mistakes and the way Maresca has been sort of protecting him and his treatment of him. I think there's obviously something there that Maresca is seeing that we don't, and I might not necessarily agree, but he's the one in the job, not me. So I just got to go with it.
Fair enough. But just before we move on, I think it speaks to maybe what was available in the market, right? Because I can't think of too many other goalkeepers who are of the stature of an Allison, Edison, etc., who are available this summer. So that's another interesting area where we might see an improvement later on, maybe next transfer window or next season. But moving on to the centre backs, we've got five currently listed here with Disasi, Tosin, Badiashile, Colwill, and Fofana. I would argue maybe you could chuck Vega in there, but he could play three positions. But yeah, what do you make of like having five centre backs for this system?
Yeah, see, I think five center backs in a system that's primarily going to play two game in, game out is fine. Disasi obviously is doubling as a right back right now because of James's injury. And of course, like you said, Vega can play anywhere between center back, left back, and CDM. So I think five is okay. Again, there was some transfer business there which left me a little baffled because you've got someone like Trev Chalobah who we've said ended the season probably as a number one, and you've gone and made a sort of mockery of him. And obviously now he's at Palace, and I don't think he had a great game over the weekend. But you've gone and Tosin on a free. Yes, Tosin sort of does increase the overall height of the team, which is a good thing. But I wonder if that was something that we needed to do. And then again, of course, in terms of their current performances, Badiashile is not really looking his best. He's been ball napping a bunch, and of course, Colwell is a little rash and immature at times. So overall, I think five center backs is fine. I just would have hoped that maybe we had a more experienced head in there. I think Tosin is supposed to be that, but obviously, if he's not on the pitch, his experience is not really it's sort of null and void. What do you make of it?
It sounds like what you're saying is five centre backs is fine as long as they're not as shit as the five we have. It sounds
I
like it's a skill like quality issue rather than a numbers issue. At least that's what I'm hearing. I think five in this scenario is fine because, well, it's smart because, like you say, Disasi is not only playing cover for right back, but he's essentially covering for Fana, who hasn't played more than a handful of games, if that, in the last two seasons, right? So I think everybody's kind of being very cautious with Fofana. He's playing one game a week right now, and he's holding up pretty well. But let's see his longevity throughout a whole season, and I think you'll see Disasi coming into the squad, like you said, or Tosin, or maybe both, depending on Reece James and Gusto's fitness. So yeah, in a way, I guess we can quickly jump into the right back discussion because it should be quite a cut and dry situation. We like both our right backs. Both are injury prone, one more injury prone than the other. One thing I've always wondered is should we have sold James after those kind of 1.5 good seasons that he had?
Not for me, no. I don't think we should have sold James. It's similar to Connor. I'm on. It's that same sort of conversation where I don't think we should be letting these go. I felt the same about Mount. Obviously, now we have the benefit of hindsight to say selling Mount was a great decision at the time we did. But no, I don't think we should have sold James. In terms of James versus Gusto, I think when James is fully fit, we will probably see him make the sort of team A as it is right now, the Premier League squad, where Gusto then makes it into the cup games. That's my sort of assessment of it, just because I think James offers a whole other dimension and quality that Gusto is still getting to. Not to say that Gusto isn't fantastic in his own right, but I think James is just that one level above him. What are your thoughts?
I think, I mean, I'm just gonna speak more generally about the defensive unit. If you're looking across the back four, I think we're pretty stacked all in all. In terms of numbers, yeah, you've got three players who can play in each position. That's good from a squad building perspective. Like you say, maybe the quality isn't there. Again, the handling of Chilwell made no sense. I really don't understand how they think that freezing someone out of the squad is going to maintain their value in the market. You know what I mean? So again, we've talked about the board's approach to sales, but yeah, ultimately, I think their treatment of Chilwell has detracted from his market value, and it means he's with us, he's with the squad. So I think left back is clearly our strongest area with Vega, Chilwell, and Cucurella. James's injury proneness means right back, could do with maybe some slight reinforcement, but right now we're making do with Disasi. So I would say overall, the defensive unit is pretty well supported, let's say.
Mm, fair enough. I think I'm with you on that. Like you said, three players for every position is solid depth, so we should be fine on the whole defensive side of things. When it comes to the midfield, of course, now this is a very juicy topic, right? So running through the players, you've got Enzo Fernandez, you've got Moises Caicedo, our two big name signings, of course. You've got Romeo Lavia, who is essentially like a new player after the injuries he had last season. You have Carney, Chukwemeka, you have Cesare Casadei, and then of course you have Drewsbury Hall who's come in, and Omari Kellyman who came in from Villa at the U21 level. I guess he's playing. So, but what do you make of the rest? I mean, what's your assessment of these number of players we have versus the number of positions that we have to play these players in?
Yeah, so I mean, on the Kellyman thing, I think that was just done to help Aston Villa out of the PSR, whirlwind that's currently taking over a lot of clubs' attention. So I think we've just helped them out there. You've got Carney and Cassidy, who for me, I mean, this is an example of the downsides of the approach that, whoever's making the decisions to sign players in this way, where they're signing the most talented youngsters on the planet and adding them all into this squad, but without any sort of limit on cost or squad size. This is the example of where it goes wrong, right? Because you've got two extremely talented central midfielders who aren't getting any time on the pitch whatsoever. And then when you bring in the fact that you've got in Kunku this season, who didn't play much last season, and you've got Felix Palmer. All of these guys are playing in the number 10 role. Like you mentioned, we have limited spots on the team for people like Kanye and Cassidy, right? So ultimately, this shines a light on the flaw in the plan that was to collect and hoard the top youngsters in the world and watch them flourish. They can't flourish if they're not playing any games. And it's definitely highlighted by our midfield. So you're expecting to play maybe two or maximum three central midfielders, depending on who we play against. And right now, Enzo, Caicedo, and Lavia are clearly our top choices. And KDH is right behind them as like almost like a manager's signing. So I really struggle to see where Carney and Cassidy are going to get their time from. And again, look, this is an area where we already had Conor Gallagher. So did you really need to go and sign anyone? Uh, Raises a lot of questions. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you on that as well. I think Gallagher's omission and getting the likes of Drewsbury Hall didn't really make sense if you just looked at it with what we had. And now, yeah, the composition in terms of the midfield is a little it's a little complicated because now who'd you play? I mean, you have Caicedo, who's obviously gonna sit back and sort of destroy counters. When you have Lavia, he's sitting right there as well. You know, they're able to sort of unlock each other and one goes forward while the other sits back. And then Enzo is playing a more advanced role right now. I mean, it begs the question, which is our best sort of midfield to play, right? What's the best combination? There's a lot of chatter about how Enzo and Caicedo together is not our best. They are the most expensive players, but it doesn't make sense to play them together. So I don't know, but what is your take on that? And we're discussing that during the Forest game, and have you sort of had a chance to marinate in your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly marinating, Prashant, and this is just one of the topics that I marinate upon or in. Because I think we could do a separate pod, and we probably will, on player performances and tactical incongruencies or basically potential improvement points, right? But just on the Enzo Caicedo, I disagree with you. I do think they can be played together. Pochettino didn't have much of a system last season. So it's natural for people, playing in partnerships in that sort of quote unquote system to look disjointed, right? Whereas this season, I just think Enzo is being played out of position and it's so obvious. It's crazy. Meanwhile, you've got, against smaller teams, especially, you can't be benching a player like Nkunku, who could actually play in that spot instead of Enzo. But like you said, then if you're not playing, let's say you're playing in Kunku, right? Are you really going to drop Enzo? Because like you said, he's one of our biggest transfers under this new era. So yeah, many questions raised.
Exactly. But on to the wingers then. I mean, let's look at who we have there. Obviously, Madueke. I said he was gonna go. I hold my hands up. He didn't go. And I'm happy he didn't. Obviously, on the balance of things. So Madueke, Mudryk, and Palmer, who were obviously there last season, and then you have Neto and Sancho, who've come in. So that's five wingers on the books. What are your thoughts on a wing situation?
Yeah, I mean, like we said earlier, Neto, we hope for the best. And he's a little bit out of the mold, right? Because he's a little bit older than the signing mandate that they have. So you're hoping that this is like, okay, for every like 4 or 5 youngsters they're buying, they're signing one slightly more proven quality player. And hopefully that maintains some consistency or some performance level in our game while we're waiting for other players to grow. Mudryk, man, I mean, I like him. I feel like he gets a lot of crap, but I feel like there's so much talent there just in his speed alone. I just love watching him play. That he should just be able to see out his contract and see how he can grow his career. But yeah, I think okay, just looking at it in general, right? We're talking about how good was the transfer business in this. This is another area where I think like we should be pretty happy with this. Madueke's early season form aside, that's a pretty stacked winger lineup. And these are all Chelsea players. We haven't loaned anybody in. And then they're gonna be going back. I believe as long as we finish above 14th place, we are obliged to buy Sancho from United. So
Correct. Correct.
frankly speaking, this is fantastic business, and it's if you're expecting to play the amount of games that we are expecting to play in a season, and you take in the fact that wingers tend to get injured more just because they carry the ball a lot, and they're running at full tilt most of the time. Yeah, I think this is a pretty smart way to operate the squad, at least in the winger spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the Sancho piece of business as well is a good example of, I think, the club actually making the most of a situation and doing some smart business, right? We've not gone and splashed the cash on him. He's kind of undervalued given his overall valuation, you might say that we picked him up at a time when it was at lowest, and it was it was a smart piece of business, and hopefully we're able to make the most of it. So I think, yeah, wingers, we're pretty sorted for like you said, for the number of games we have, and there's already impact. I'm encouraged most by the fact that everyone's had a positive contribution. Palmer is not someone we really speak about in this conversation because he's head and shoulders above, but even Mudryk could have had a couple of assists. He probably should have had at least 5, 6 assists till now because of the way he's been playing. So everyone's clicking, and that's a good thing. So yeah, I'm kind of
Yeah,
happy with that.
and speaking of smart business, I would throw Felix into that category as well. What do you think?
So João Felix, I mean, we definitely didn't see the best of him during his first spell at Chelsea. Obviously, he has massive potential, and there's a reason he broke out onto the scene so early. But given how his first spell was, he definitely has something to prove, and I'm really hoping we see the best of him. As I already mentioned on our one of our first pods, actually. And that leads us very nicely into the rest of the forward lineup. So João Felix, of course, Christopher Nkunku, who we've already spoken about a bit as well. Jackson, who's had a strong start to the season, which we talked about in our last pod. And then you rounded off with Mark Gu, who joined from Barcelona, a really young player. And somewhere in there is David Washington as well, who I think is primarily playing with the under 21s. So, what are your thoughts on Felix and the rest of our forward line, Sharon?
Yeah, I throw Felix into the smart business category again. Similar example to Sancho. His value has really fallen off. Um, Apparently he didn't have a great season or half season, whatever it was with Barcelona.
Yes.
But nevertheless, you can see the guy's talent, and whatever we've seen of him so far, his work rate is actually quite impressive, which is something I wasn't expecting. But also, what I was expecting is his ingenuity and flair. I think he adds a lot to that number 10 position. Like let's say Madueke is injured or is off form, you're gonna put Palmer on the right flank. You got to ask, okay, who am I gonna put in the number 10 role? I would actually say, look, Felix throws his hands up and is extremely, extremely creative, and he's got the technicality to actually execute on it. In that regard, I would put him higher than Kunku. And that's why I think, when both of them come on against Nottingham Forest, you see Nkunku playing striker and Felix playing behind him because there's just an understanding that Felix can connect. Granted, Nkunku is probably slightly more physical in his gameplay as well. But yeah, I think Felix, his style of play and his creativity lends himself to being a very, very good number 10. Again, you could argue, did we really need another number 10? But this guy and Sancho, they both fall under, like, look, these guys have proven that they can do it. It's just about maybe putting them in a system that allows them to flourish. As for the rest of the forwards, Guyu, I love his work rate, and we should try and give him minutes as a sub in both the Prem and Cup competitions. But I mean, maybe I'm asking for too much. Nicholas Jackson should be leading the line. I disagree with what you said about Osimhen. I don't think we should have signed him, and I'm glad it didn't happen because it would have broken a lot of the structures. And yeah, and Kunku, man, like he's an extremely, extremely good backup right now. And the only reason I say that is because, again, he hasn't played a lot of football. So his minutes actually just need to be managed. If he gets through the season completely fit and plays a lot of minutes, then you're talking next season about having potentially two very good strikers, and who could potentially be on the pitch at the same time. So again, the thing is with players like Nkunku, Lavia, you're talking about James and I guess Gusto on and off. But with those guys, right, who have had long-term injuries, right, multiple long-term injuries, and Fofana, sorry, they this season their minutes have to be managed. They cannot be expected to play at the highest level 90 minutes for, let's say, 38 Premier League games. And I think that could potentially also be one of the reasons why we see a bloated squad. I think we've got down here that, okay, after we've gone through the strikers or the forwards now, we're looking at a squad of 30 players. I mean, how does that make you feel? Like, what do you think that's too big, or does it kind of make sense?
I think the ideal squad size was probably around 24, 23, 24, I guess, is the right squad size. That said, I think what this has given us the advantage of is the ability to have a very distinct team A and team B. With the way Maresca is handling it, having a team A and a team B, essentially having two distinct starting 11s who are basically in those respective competitions as frequently as possible. So Premier League is obviously week in, week out. Conference League and Carabao not so frequent, but they're still regular enough that team building and chemistry is being built within a group of players, and it's giving players a chance to sort of prove their point, push their own agenda, and make a case to be in the to move from the B squad to the A squad. I think it's great. I think won't complain about the squad size because of the way we're handling it, right? So you have two distinct sets of 11. You have enough players to make a solid bench, even when you're not including some of the 18 players in a conference league, for example. Cole Palmer isn't in the squad at all, but you still have a pretty stacked bench because you have other players you bring in. And when you throw in the fact that we're utilizing youngsters as well, I think it's a good number to have. What about you?
No, I can definitely see the plus points, and I agree with you that it's kind of like playing Football Manager. It never really seemed realistic though and doable in real life, and it comes down to execution on the managerial level. And Maresca seems to be able to do it. He seems to be able to manage so far. Like again, we should caveat by saying this: we're maybe a month and a half into the season, but so far he seems to have managed the egos in the dressing room, and people are just aware that look, fine, I'm not going to get on the pitch to play in Europe or in the Premier League. But like you say, I think there will come a time where he will have to bend some of his rules, or he will have to sort of signal to the A team that look, your starting spot is not guaranteed. If somebody performs well in the cup competitions, with everyone that may be, they are being considered for the Premier League, unless your performances in the Prem as the A team hold up. As long as there's that level of accountability, I think at least the club should benefit from that in terms of league position and challenging for trophies.
Yeah.
And actually, okay, so having said all of that, right? We're talking about a 30-man squad. So I'm going to ask you to choose who do you think is going to have the best season in the squad?
Okay, so I was expecting Jackson to sort of really step up. I know I said I wanted Osimhen, and it was a bad piece of business, and I still maintain it was a bad piece of business, not just because of the fact that we didn't land him, but also because of the amount of focus we put on it and then didn't land him. It was just sort of embarrassing. But um, I back Osimhen, I back Jackson to have a really good season. Because
Prashant, we don't have Osimhen, okay? We don't have him.
that
You
was
just
gonna
got to
be
get
edited
over
out.
it, bro.
It was gonna be edited out. I was actually gonna edit that out. Um, yeah. So sorry. Yes, I backed Jackson to have a good season. Because in spite of his wayward finishing, right? I think there were signs that he was already he was looking good, and we already talked about this. So I'm not going to get into it. Long story short, Jackson should have a really good season, and I think he's showing it. He started strong, and I expect him to continue. What about you?
Yeah, so look, man, I would love to be sitting here and saying like, oh, Connie's gonna have a great season, but since we have like six number 10s, some of these youngsters are just gonna have to wait their chance or leave the club. So I'm just gonna go with somebody a little bit more obvious. I think Caicedo, I think he's gonna live up to the billing this year, and hopefully he's a bit more consistent than how he finished last season. He was great at the end of last season, but I still think he had a few things to work on in his game. This season, I think he has already shown that okay, he's got the idea of how to play as the pivot. Now that's either on his own or next to an inverting fullback or another central midfielder like Labia. I think he's figured out how to either do it on his own or as a double pivot. Um, so yeah, I think he's going to be extremely critical to this side, and I think he will actually perform to the levels that he is required to.
Yeah, that makes sense on Caicedo. I think you're right. He did have some areas to sort of polish up, and I think again he's been putting in some pretty good shifts as well. So let's just see how it goes. Another interesting question I had for you is then, who do you think has this season as a make or break season for them, right? So this season basically decides the future of their career at Chelsea. Who comes to mind?
I mean, I hate using Carney and also Cassidy as an example, but let's say they don't even get on the pitch that much. Does that make it a make or break season? Because it's just basically a break season, right? They'll just leave the club. So I think since if we're just talking about this from a performance level, I think for me, you got to look at somebody like Badia Shield, right? Who
Mhm.
I feel is kind of coasting a bit, and he's already making the Conference League look difficult, and Barrow would look pretty difficult for him as well. So I think for me, this is the season he has to show that okay, look, at least he can do it against the weaker teams, and he has some consistency in his locker. So yeah, for me, if he's not up to par this year, you have to offload him, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. I have two players that come to my mind. One is a bit more obvious than the other. So Mikhailo Mudryk, I think obviously there is an element of
Oh
he
man, you gotta go easy on the guy, bro. He's just a kid.
yeah, no, he is. And you know, I understand it. He's young, he is very fast. Sometimes it seems like his legs are thinking faster than his brain is. And I get all of that, right? But there is an element of we sort of just went for him because Arsenal wanted him. And I think he really has to sort of step up, show that he has the ability that was talked of about him, right? And I also think at the same time that he is showing he's getting better, so he's going to have to make the most of his time on the pitch, I think. And another player for me, and this is a bit of a controversial one, because when you asked me earlier if we should have sold him, I said no, but he's getting to a point where if he's not going to make an impact, then he's got to go, and that's Reece James. I'm sorry, but I think um, he's really not managing his body well, and injuries are really costing him. And he's also been quite rash, like coming on and getting sent off very stupidly. It's not helping his cause. So if he really wants to make his claim rather as the best right back in the league, which I have no doubt he is better than Trent when he's in form. He's going to have to show up. So I think it's really going to be this season to show up. Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty big one. Still club captain, right?
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Okay, so Prashant is as ruthless as Maresca is. He doesn't give a shit who anyone is. If they're not up to par, they're going. And you know what? If that is something that we need to credit both Maresca and the board, right? Maresca and the board are both showing the ruthless side of the business or of the game. Maresca has to make tough calls. He's going to have to disappoint some people. But he shows no qualms in doing that. And the board also, to their credit, although we don't like to give them too much, they also do the same. Once they've decided that somebody is not up to par or they need to be offloaded for whatever reason, they make efforts to doing that. Those efforts have clearly not been that successful for players like Chilwell, but yeah, I do think that also makes it more of a performance related environment going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think you do have to be ruthless in business sometimes. And these guys are approaching this as a business, and it is a results-oriented game at the end of the day. So I guess that ruthlessness will be needed. And it sucks to say, but yeah, Reece James is going to have to prove himself for me, and that is just how I see it. So, okay, to wrap this up, then, what's your rating of the transfer window?
Um, I mean, look, we'll have to put our grudges with the board on player treatment aside. But I do think letting Petrovic go, Chalobah go, and Gallagher go are huge negatives. I think Sterling, even though we don't agree with the way they did it, he probably wasn't that big a deal. And now that I say that,
Yeah.
he's probably going to go and win a title with Arsenal. But if I let me just put it this way, if I just look at where we've landed up and what Maresca has to play with, right? Goalkeepers are there's a question mark there for sure. Centre backs, left backs, right backs, midfield, wingers, forwards. Honestly, it's the whole thing is stacked. So for me, we're just left with one question mark area, and that's goalkeepers. I would say this transfer window has been extremely turbulent, like I said. So I'd give it a 6, but overall, the squad build and where we've ended up now, I'd probably give it a 7 or 7.5. And I can't say much higher than that because they bought high potential players. So hopefully that rating continues to rise season on season when it comes to rating the squad build. But yeah, I think I can't go higher than a 6 on this specific transfer window just gone, simply because of the way we've treated some of the players and we've let go of 4 Chelsea youngsters. I don't know. Does that make sense? Have I given them too much credit?
No, I think it makes sense. For similar reasons, I ranked the window at a 5 when I first thought about this. Given where we are now, a month and a half in, and with the benefit of hindsight, I might say, okay, it's closer to maybe a 6.5 or a 7 because of the way the players are actually turning out. The likes of Neto and João Felix, and Sancho, who are probably the three big name acquisitions in the forward line, are really, really showing up. And of course, then you have smart business like Vega being such a versatile player and again showing up. I think I'm able to see maybe why they made the decisions they did. So with hindsight, I'd say 6.5 or 7, but my initial assessment was a 5.
Yeah, those are some fair points, but let me ask you this then. What could the recruitment team have done better to raise their score? Like again, I understand that you're saying in hindsight, given certain performances, you're rating the window at a 6.5 to a 7, but you could argue maybe the best signing so far has been Enzo Maresca, right? But if you look at talent on its own, where maybe you had us more as a 5, without seeing any sort of competitive play, what could the recruitment team have done differently, or where could they have added or changed things?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, you really stumped me with this one, man. If I really had to think about it, I think I get the thought behind going for these young players and saying, okay, they have all the makings of future talent. And obviously there's a lot of big names that we have who have been performing really, right? Who aren't even with the squad, right? Estevao and Kenry Baez coming to mind. But at the same time, in the vein, you had Angelo Gabriel, who was supposed to be really big, and we've gone and sold him to, what was it, a Saudi team or whatever, right? So I don't know if we're putting too much emphasis on potential talent and neglecting sort of the players who may be a little older and that whole recruitment strategy. Like, I know it's coming from the board down, but my thought is this really the best way in the long run? I mean, you do have, I guess we have shown flexibility just when we've gone and signed like a Pedro Neto, right? Like you already said, he didn't fit the mold of our typical signing. But yeah, if to answer your question, what they could do to really raise the score would be to basically get people who are more nailed on talents, right? Don't take so many gambles for me. I think that would be it. What about you?
Well, so I mean, it follows on to what you've been moaning on about this whole episode, mate. It's been tiring, but yeah, you really wanted somebody like an Osimhen who's, I mean, most people would say proven pedigree. I've heard some arguments to suggest that he had one extremely good season for Napoli, and the other seasons he's kind of underwhelmed and had injuries. But I see your point there, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think what this squad lacks and where they could have improved is bringing in experience and leadership. Leadership, 100%. We are lacking that on the pitch, and you could see that against Nottingham Forest, where really a couple of experienced heads on the pitch would have calmed these kids down. You go 1-0 down and you don't just throw your toys out of the pram. Madueke was all over the place. He was taking shots from left, right, and center. Again, you need an experienced head to look at him and tell him, dude, you're wasting the ball. You're being too selfish. So I just think we go back to all the way to our goalkeeper discussion. I think I'm leaning towards saying, you know what, we should have brought in. I mean, I look, I don't know if Yano Black was available, but somebody like that who, okay, fine, maybe he's not an Edison or an Allison with the ball at his feet, but he's a leader. He brings so much other value to the team. Or simply look at a leadership gap in centre back. Colwill, he looks like a leader, but he loses his temper pretty quickly. I've seen him wrestle players
Yeah,
almost in every game. It's crazy.
yeah,
Um, so I'm looking at that's where the recruitment strategy has been off and where they need to add. It's like you say, it's proven talent, but it's also just experienced heads and leaders.
yeah. Which is a bit of a oxymoron when you think about young and future talent, right? It's very rare that you're going to get someone who's young and has that sort of leadership experience. I think someone who really showcased it at a young age is Reece James. I mean, he captained Wigan in his last game there, right? When he was what, 20, playing for them on loan, right? So those kind of players are few and far between, and I think yeah, it's gonna be tricky to see how the recruitment team can actually step up to this challenge, so to speak, that we have set out for them, if they even freaking know about this. But yeah. um
Yeah, no,
great.
honestly, you laugh, man, but it's a very good question, right? Do they even care about that? Because if they're running it as a business, they're just trying to grow players, and either you cash in on those players as they grow, or those players are helping you win trophies, right? I don't know if they're looking into the softer skills of the game, the mental aspects or not.
Yeah, fair point. It would be great to be a fly on the wall in the meetings around recruitment and all of that. Like
And
I would love that.
just watch Boli and Iqbali go at each other, right?
Yeah, like a bunch of 2-year-olds by the sounds of it. Anyway, on that note, we're gonna end this episode of We Burn Blue. Let us know what your rating for the window was over on X at We Burn Blue Pod. And if you like what you hear, give us a follow on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, and leave us a review. Any last words, Sharan?
Yeah, I think just let Prashant know, is he smoking something about Osimhen, or is he onto something? I think he needs a bit of closure on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, man. Way to throw me under the bus.